Well, folks, it is my pleasure as director of the Fort Kent Public Library to introduce one of our talented local authors that we have in the St. John Valley. And Theresa Sear is here to show us the new books and new editions that have come out from her series, her young adult series. And we are looking forward to hearing what she has to say and how this all came about, and may she sell many books.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so I am Theresa Sear, in case you don't know who I am. If you don't know anything about me, I've been a teacher for almost 20 years. I've been around the St. John Valley. I now live in Jay, Maine with my husband, and I now teach at the Dixfield School down there. Let's see, I can thank COVID for getting started because I've been wanting to write for a very long time. And it's ironic that somebody walked in here who was part of my inspiration, Jaji. We were listening to another author, Emma Rose is her name, and we were listening to her talk about how she develops her characters, and it was the second time she'd come to school. She talked about developing her characters and talked about the whole publishing process, and then we started talking about what she was doing for writing. And so I ended up getting COVID. First, it was a week before, or 2 weeks before February break, and I'm stuck at home and I'm sitting down and I'm like, I don't know what to write. So I start writing about two kids that end up in this alternate universe. And then I didn't know where to go with that. And this is okay, because I like that kind of sci-fi stuff. And then about a month later, after trying to write it out, I sat down again and I'm like, no, I'm going to scrap this. So I started over again and kind of adjusted it. And I came out with these two kids that end up going back 100 years. And the entire time I'm visualing the Four Seasons Trail in Madawaska. And if you know where the Bolyers and the Lavatsus have their house in Madawaska, I used to climb up there with my friends and just look at Madawaska. And you could see the river and you can see pretty much the townscape of Madawaska. And so that's what Cloverville is. If you've read it, Cloverville is the name of the town. And not sure how I got the name for that. I just happened. I did a lot of research about what life was like back in 1922 because this was in 2022 that I was writing this. And while I wrote the first book, I also started writing the second book because as I'm writing about Brooke and Bentley getting lost in 100 years in the past, we have this new character, Henry, who is trying to help them get back home and trying to figure out how this all works. And I'm like, there's a story about Henry to tell too. So after I finished the first book, which this is the old cover and this is the new improved cover. Yeah, you have a limited edition, yes. So
these are mine, okay?
Yeah. So after I finished, as I was writing this one, I was kind of writing the second book, Henry's Decision, and I published this one, oh gosh, I want to say it was October. And this one ended up being done. I remember New Year's Eve sitting down and hitting submit. And it was published like within 2 months, 2.5 months of finishing the first one. But this one, the last one, Pete, took a little bit longer. I really wanted to do a really good job with Pete because Pete was Henry's best friend. Because Henry's story is that he got lost in the early 1900s when he was like 12 years old and got adopted kind of, you know, not formally adopted, but taken in by Pete's grandmother. And so they were like brothers almost as they were growing up and living their lives. And he's like in his 20s when the story takes place. And when whatever happens to Henry, I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but whatever happens to Henry happens, Pete's left by himself. And I thought it's important to talk about this because in the book about Henry, I refer a lot to what happens to Pete afterwards. So I'm not going to say much more about Pete because it's really important that you not get spoiled on this one because I really, I worked a long time. This one took me, oh gosh, it took me over a year. Not just because I was working on trying to get things right for him, but we were also moving. When you're living out of boxes and living between two homes for a few months, it's tough to do. So anyways, does anybody have questions? If not, I can read a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is the first time I ever do this. So I'm not going to lie. I'm a little nervous and a little humble because talking about something I've sat down and created. And I struggled a lot with, what's it called? Imposter syndrome. You know, like, oh, I couldn't have done this. It's not that big a deal. Until I had somebody say to me, while I was sitting down in their living room in the 3 months I was living with them, my father-in-law, saying, you could just sit there and write this story just like that. And I thought, maybe it's a little bit more of a bigger deal than I realized, you know? So, because yeah, I guess I can do that. Yeah. So, is it okay if I sit? Okay, good. All right. So this first part, this is when Brooke and Bentley are first arriving. They've just realized that something was different. So Brooke and Bentley looked around trying to assess their situation. Aside from their missing friends, bird feeders and bench, and most of all the trail they knew it, nothing else looked much different. The trees were the same kind, at least they seemed to be. There were still fir and pine trees with some red and sugar maples, birches and oak trees all mixed together around them. There were ferns and spongy mosses spread around the shady parts of the ground with various lichens on some of the rocks and trees. The chickadees, finches, and nuthatches were still flitting about in the lower branches looking for food, and there were a couple of squirrels scolding each other in the higher branches. That didn't seem much different either. The sun was still shining midway in the eastern sky, showing that it was still morning, and there was still a slight cool breeze flowing through the leaves as it was when they started their hike not long before. The beautiful morning hadn't changed, but something big and significant had, and Brooke and Bentley couldn't quite put their finger on it. Well, we can't stay standing here, Brooke interrupted Bentley's thoughts. We need to do something. We need to move. What can we do? He shrugged. Where are we going to go? Bentley's thoughts were racing as he continued to look around for a solution. I don't know, maybe head back to where we came from? We weren't far from the start of the trail and the lodge. He gestured toward the lodge. Yeah, that's an idea, Bentley nodded. He released her hand and they started walking toward the lodge. Maybe the others did go back and hide and were making a big deal out of nothing. He might have said it, but Bentley was seriously doubting that that was the case. Something significant had definitely happened. Shaking her head in disbelief, she followed. I just don't get it, Bent. How could they have done that so quickly and quietly in just seconds, moments? It just didn't make sense. I know. I don't understand it either. They continued on the trail, slowly and carefully keeping a lookout for anything that might give them any clue as to what happened, or for anything like their friends jumping out to surprise them. It was clear that the trail wasn't as developed as it had been in the start of their hike. It wasn't as wide and cleared out as it had been before. There were no trail markers in the trees and no other improvements that Brooke and Bentley remembered always having been on the trail. They eventually arrived at the tree line and stopped to look around at the field before them. There was still an open clearing, but no lodge. What the heck? Exclaimed Bentley, panic beginning to grow. Where did the lodge go? Brooke just stood there with her brow furrowed, deep in thought. Something has definitely happened, Bent. She turned to look at him. Did you notice how the trail wasn't as developed as it had been? Yeah, he said slowly, and looked around, worried about what she was getting at. And the bird feeders and the bench were gone? Brooke continued, her voice starting to quiver. I don't think we're home anymore. What are you talking about? He turned to face her. He knew what she was going to say, but wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. Think about it. She turned to look at him as well, indicating toward the tree line and the empty field where the lodge should be as she spoke. Our friends disappeared, and so did everything else on the trail. The trail isn't the same, and the lodge is gone. What are you saying? His face showed his anticipation. Did we walk through some portal or something? Bentley asked, afraid of her answer. Yeah, I do. Brooke shrugged, looking around with her hands on her hips. So what do we do now? He asked. Should we just keep walking and stop at the first house we see? Do we have any other choice? She bent down to tie her shoelace that kept getting loose, then stood back up. Let's head down and see what we find. They both adjusted their backpacks that they had filled with supplies for their day-long hike, then continued down through the clearing, walking in silence. I'll go to Henry's decision now. Okay, so without giving too much of a spoiler, at some point Henry ends up going back even further in time. And he ends up meeting, like in the first book, Henry has to deal with some guy named Robert Fenton. And if you've read it, Robert Fenton is this bad guy. He's the antagonist. He's the one that is trying to capture anybody that doesn't belong there and kind of put him away because he doesn't want the timeline affected. And so where Henry ends up being, he meets another person that does pretty much the same thing. So as she's trying to do something to the portal, he tries to stop her. And this is where we pick up. What the heck, Henry? Hannah was laying on the ground on her side, and I landed next to her. Why are you yelling at me? I hadn't realized yet what had happened to us. I struggled to stand up and started brushing dirt off my clothes. What were you trying to do anyway? I reached down to offer her a hand, but she smacked my hand away. Get away from me, she yelled. Fine, suit yourself. I shrugged, pulled my head back, and turned to start walking back down the trail, but then stopped. The trail wasn't there. It didn't exist at all. It was gone. There were barely any trees. All that surrounded me was pasture and brush. The only indicator of where the portal was located was a large granite boulder. I made a mental note of the rock, but then was distracted by our situation. Watching me stop and look around as she was standing up and brushing off any dirt, Hannah said, "Where did the trail go?" She looked around. "And all the trees." She looked up at me, realizing what this all meant. "What did you do, Henry?" "Oh, no, I began pacing and running my hands through my hair. "Not again. You've got to be kidding me." She threw up her hands and turned back toward the portal. "I knew I should have destroyed that stupid portal." She picked up her pace as she was preparing to go back through it. Seeing her heading back towards the portal, I warned, I wouldn't go through that right now. I couldn't let her go through. There was no telling where she would end up at this point. See, they've developed laws. Like, they've learned that depending on when you go through depends on whether or not you're going to go where you should be, right? She stopped and turned to look at me. If looks could kill, I'd be buried pretty deep right now. And why not? I tilted my head. Considering what you do for a living and that you've read Fenton's journals, you have no idea how the portal works? What do you mean? Her hands on her hips. Look, I wasn't due to go back to 1922 for another week. So because you were trying to do something to that portal, and you tackled me, she jumped in, and I tackled you, I agreed, nodding. We're now somewhere in time before 1922. I don't know exactly when we are, but we're not in 2022 or 1922. I looked around where we were standing. If anything, we're probably way before the 1900s even. What if we go back through it now? I could hear the concern in her voice. If we go back now, then we wouldn't end up back in 2022. And I have no idea when we'll end up. I continued pacing with my hand on my head, trying to think. Hannah sat down on the ground and put her head on her hands. Good, I thought to myself. She's getting the seriousness of the situation that she put us in. She rocked back and forth. What are we going to do? Well, we can't stay here. She looked up at me with tears coming down her cheeks. Where did the tough-as-nails woman go, I thought to myself. The sobbing mess sitting on the ground before me was not the Hannah I knew. I sat down on the ground near her and put my arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her. She started to shrug me off, but relented. Listen, I completely understand what you're feeling right now, I began. I did. I knew exactly how she felt. The first time I went through the portal, I was 12. But I eventually figured things out, and we'll figure this out now, too. You'll see. She wiped her eyes on the bottom of her shirt. What are we going to do? I stood up and offered my hand to help her again. This time she took my hand. We'll need to go toward town and figure out where to stay tonight. She sniffed as she wiped the dirt off the seat of her pants. How are we going to do that? I admitted, I don't know that yet, but we'll figure it out. We turned and started walking through the brush in what we thought was the right direction. We were heading downhill, so it seemed like we were going the right way. No matter where we are, the portal is always up the hill from town. When was Cloverville established as a town? Hannah asked, keeping pace with me. I shrugged. When I originally arrived in 1907, it was already a town, but I don't know for how long. I don't think we're going to fit in here, she declared, looking down at her clothes, especially the way we're dressed. Yeah, I agreed. We might have a problem. I paused for a bit before speaking again. We might have to steal someone's laundry. Ew, she reacted and giggled. It was nice to hear her laugh. So far, since I've met her, I've met the tough-as-nails Hannah, the scared Hannah, and now the happy Hannah. I hope I can avoid meeting the pissed-off Hannah. I know what you mean, I began, but we really don't have a choice. We walked for a bit before I added, it's not like we have any money that won't bring us any unwanted attention right now. She stopped. Oh, I didn't think about that. How will we handle that? First of all, I took a minute to get my shoe untangled from a small shrub before continuing. No one knows anything about us, so if we can get ourselves some clothing from this period, we can pass ourselves off as travelers just working our way through. We can come up with some story that will be believed. Then we can work for a room and food for tonight and figure out the rest tomorrow. We walked in silence for a while, both deep in our own thoughts. Eventually, we arrived at the crest of the hill and stopped to look over the town and assess our situation. We were in for quite the surprise. There was nothing. "Oh my God," Hannah said as she looked around. There was no road that ran along the field we were standing in, and no houses for as far as you could see. There was no town. This was going to be a problem. We were stuck wearing our 2022 clothing. There were no other people around to get any help from, and no possible shelter for the night. It looks like we'll have to rough it for tonight. I turned to Hannah. "Do you know how to build a shelter and make fire?" She gave me a look, asking me if I was serious. "Yes, I'm serious, Hannah." She looked back toward where the town should be inside. "We're going to die." I laughed. "No, we're not." I began walking again and assured her, "We'll figure this out." So the last book, I have this one character who is one of my favorite characters in this part. And she was kind of modeled against some of other characters that I read in other series. Jenna Lorraine, I think is the name of the author. She writes this whole series, and there's these like really quirky older ladies that are like former Vietnam veterans, CIA kind of thing. You know, they're like really kooky, crazy, but also badass. Okay, that's okay. I'm not in middle school. I can say that word. So, anyways, I kind of like that persona, so I created a character that was very much like her or like them. Okay, so this is Pete's perspective, though. There was a sudden knock on my door, and I almost dropped the cell phone. I hurried to my room to stash it between my mattress and box spring. By the way, this is 1922, so he's got someone's cell phone, not his. I hurried to my room to stash it between my mattress and box spring, then rushed back to peer through the curtains in my front door. A wave of relief came over me. It was just Mrs. O'Neill. She was an elderly lady who lived across the street from my apartment and who occasionally asked me to help her with little odd jobs around her place. I opened the door, trying not to sound out of breath. "Hello, Mrs. O'Neill." "Hello, dear." She stood at her doorway, balancing herself on her cane. "I noticed that you were home, and I need to reach something in my closet. Could you help me with that?" "Sure, Mrs. O'Neill," I said with a smile. "I'll go over now and get it for you." I turned to get my keys and locked the door behind me as I walked out, following her to her house. I took a slow, deep breath as I walked in. Her house always smells delicious. She was always baking something, either bread or cookies or pies. Pies were her specialty, though. She made a delicious strawberry rhubarb pie, and her lemon meringue was my weakness. Today, it smelled like banana nut bread. My niece is coming over to visit with me today, and I remembered that I have a cameo brooch that I want to give to her. Remember that cameo brooch, Mom? Yeah. Mr. Morelli, when I was living in Connecticut, had given that, to Mom, but I kind of commandeered it when I was a teenager. She began explaining. "It's made of ivory, and it was given to me when I was a young lady by a gentleman from Italy." Her voice trailed off as she became lost in a memory for a moment as we continued to walk up her stairs. We arrived at the closet, and she turned to face me with her hand on the doorknob and continued. "His name was Enzo Morelli, and he was an artist," and that was his real name, wasn't it? Right? Yeah, okay. She got that faraway look once again as she continued. "He painted so beautifully, too. Such a charming man." Were her cheeks turning red? I thought to myself. I think there's more to this story about this Enzo Morelli than I realize. She opened the door and I walked into the closet. "Where is the brooch?" I asked her as I followed her gaze toward the top of the closet. "It's on the far left corner on the very top shelf," she pointed with her cane to the floor of the closet. "Grab that step stool so you can reach it better." Obediently, I took the stool, placed it underneath where she said the brooch was, and climbed up. I felt around on the top shelf, needing to step on my toes to reach it. "You should find a small box," she added. I felt around on the shelf some more, aiming more toward the far left. Behind a hat box was a small square box. I grabbed it and stepped down, showing the simple little box to her. "Is this it?" Mrs. O'Neill's eyes grew wide with excitement. She replied, and delighted to see the box. Yes, it is." She reached for it. I handed it to her before climbing down the step stool. She stared at the box for a few moments, as if remembering that day that it was given to her. Slowly, she opened up the box. Inside, under a layer of tissue paper, was the image of a woman carved out of ivory, surrounded by by mother of pearl, not her mother, but mother of pearl, and edged with gold. I looked closer and could see how intricately carved the woman's image was. There was so much detail. It was truly beautiful. Mrs. O'Neill noticed how I was looking intently at it and asked with her head tilted, "She's beautiful, isn't she?" "She certainly is," I agreed. "The artist did a wonderful job carving her image." You know where this is going. "Yes, he did," she said dreamily as she gazed back at the cameo. She touched a stray strand of hair and absent-mindedly tucked it behind her ear. "Enzo made it for me," she breathed. "For some reason, I thought he was a painter." I looked at her curiously. "Oh, he was, but he was an artist in many ways." She looked back down at the cameo and asked, "Do you know who the woman on the cameo was?" She asked as she peered up at me. I don't know," I shrugged. "Was she a princess or something?" Mrs. O'Neill's smile brightened. "How kind." She held up the cameo next to her face for me to compare and said, "Does she look familiar now?" I looked again at the woman's image on the cameo and back at Mrs. O'Neill. I could see some similarities, but the woman was obviously much younger than Mrs. O'Neill. If there was more to her story with Enzo Morelli, then perhaps the woman's image on the cameo was actually Mrs. O'Neill. "Was this you, Mrs. O'Neill?" Even if I was wrong, I knew she would be flattered with the compliment. Her smile lit up her face as she nodded. It was indeed me. Her cheeks turned even more red as she looked back down at the cameo. I tried to imagine Mrs. O'Neill as a young woman erasing her lines and gray hair. I could easily see the resemblance to the cameo now. She's a lovely-looking lady now at her age, so I could just imagine how beautiful she must have been when she was younger. She placed the brooch back into the box, covered it up again with the tissue paper, and placed the lid back on. "Well, come have some banana bread, Pete." She leaned in as if she was about to tell me a secret. "It has chocolate chips in it this time, too." Which, by the way, I prefer. She had me at the chocolate chips. "Sounds delicious, Mrs. O'Neill." I followed her into the kitchen and sat down at the table. She placed the box of the cameo on the counter and turned to cut a couple of thick slices of banana bread and placed them on plates. I watched as the steam floated up. She laid a slice of bread in front of me and one for her, and we each had a glass of milk. She knew me well. I could see the chocolate chips dispersed throughout the slice, and it smelled delicious. We sat together like old friends enjoying our banana bread as she talked about the infamous Enzo Morelli. And I'll stop there. And the thing is as Pete has his adventures he's still in the 1920s, Mrs. O'Neill kind of manages to get herself involved in them. So that's kind of cool. There's like little connections with that. So, yeah. When I sat down and first started writing, I was thinking, how am I going to develop the characters? How am I going to figure out what's going to happen? And as an ELA teacher for the years that I taught ELA, I was kind of trained to teach kids to, use a graphic organizer and, beginning, middle, and end when it comes to your stories. And I tried that and it just wasn't working at all. Not at all. I just couldn't do it. And I thought, well, it's so much easier for me if I just sit and write. And the characters kind of created themselves and the stories kind of created themselves. You know what I'm talking about because we've had that conversation. And it seemed like effortless. The hardest part was making sure I got all my details straight between the 3 books, and which was not easy to do. And also making sure that I was historically accurate. I didn't want to refer to things that didn't exist yet, So anyhow, I thought that's part of the imposter syndrome again. I thought that I'm doing this wrong because I'm just sitting here writing it out. I'm doing this wrong when everybody else talks about how are you plotting things out. And I follow some groups on Facebook that for people who write, and that's what they all talk about. And we get this newspaper down where we live now once a month. It's free. And there was this author one article that talked about what he does when he writes. And he talked about plotting things out versus just sitting and writing. And he said that's what he does. And I'm like, oh, well, that's what I do. So, okay, maybe I know what I'm doing. And then he made reference to the fact that Stephen King writes that way. And I'm like, well, I know I'm not him, but at least I know I'm doing something right too. I'm not doing something wrong. So that was kind of, confirming for me that I guess I know where I'm going with this. So
You started the first of the series in third person, and then the last two books were in first person.
I change throughout.
Oh, okay.
I do, because, and I'm glad thank you for mentioning that. Yes, so I made sure I had the term right. It's called third person omniscient. So basically, I am switching between people's points of view. So you're not just getting Brooke and Bentley's perspective. You're not just getting Brooke's perspective. You're getting Brooke and Bentley, and you also get Henry's perspective, and a little bit of Fenton's perspective, and a little bit of Pete's perspective throughout the book. And I did that intentionally because I tried writing it as the narrator talking about everything. And that's not the kind of books I like reading. And you write the way you like reading. And a lot of the series that I read, 'cause I like sci-fi, I like all kinds of stuff. A lot of the things that I read, you're reading the perspective of the person. And it's not uncommon in some books to switch perspectives based on what who they are and what they're doing. So I kind of try to divide that like a little asterisk, separate. Okay, so now you're looking at somebody else's point of view, or something's changed. There's like a pause. So, but good question. Thank you.
You've got some characters right now. Are there other characters that you can expand on into another part of this or this series?
In this series, I could go on more with Pete and Henry, but I think I wrapped it up pretty nicely in a nice little bow at the end of the last book. That was intentional because I wanted, yeah, I know. It's one of those, and it's one of those things where as I was reading it, as I was editing it and revising it, I kept going, yeah, because I was like, oh my God, I like this. So I hope people got the same emotional connection that I got to it. My little nice little package, nice big bow. Yeah. Kind of hope that's what I developed for anybody who reads that. But I did think about that. I mean, I could, because Brooke and Bentley kind of disappear into the background in Henry's book. And that was intentional because now they're going on with their lives. Because for them, not knowing the rules of this portal, if you are gone, you have to wait till the next time that phase of the moon happens again. So if it's a quarter moon, you got to wait till the next quarter moon, which is approximately 28 days. And now that Brooke and Bentley's back, it's as if they never left. It was like a split second, so nobody realized that they were even gone. And so for them, it was easy to just slide back into their lives as if that month that they spent in 1922 never happened. But I don't know, I could always pull them back up and do something with that. That might happen later, but I don't have anything in my head right now. These three, it's like that was bouncing around in my head as I was writing this one. And I had no choice but to do those two. I felt like I would do them disservice if I didn't, even though they're not real people. I felt that they kind of take on this persona,
They do.
like they're,
They do.
as a person who's writing it, it feels like they're real people. And if I didn't include more of an explanation for Henry or for Pete, then I would have left them just dangling, Yeah. So, thank you.
Tell us about the covers. The covers they all tie together. Different seasons.
Well, the new covers, yes. The new covers, yes.
The image and the whole. Is there some significance to all of this?
The trail. The portal takes place in the trail. So let's see, which is the first one? This is the first one here. So seasons, I guess I didn't really pay attention to the seasons, I'll be honest with you. I didn't really think of that. I just really liked the images that I had. This is pictures of the trail near where we live, the Whistle Stop Trail. And I added the little portal image in there because, that's all part of all the books. And if you notice too, because I make reference to that rock, there's a rock in a couple of the covers to make it seem like, actually, I think the rock is in the portal in this cover here. So, but yeah, it's because a lot of the action takes place, the high action takes place in the trail. And that's, if it weren't for the portal in the trail, the story wouldn't have existed. So, you had a question?
Yeah, I had two questions.
Oh.
What is your writing practice? How do you, what is
Sorry.
your habit that leads you into the writing, and how often do you write? And plus, are you a pantser or a plotter?
Pantser. Yeah, that's what I was explaining a while ago. The fact that I don't plot things out. I tried it and it didn't work out. I use an app called Scrivener. It's worth the $50 to buy it because it really is. It has great tools and it has like this corkboard app part of the app, and I like sat there and like put all this stuff in order, and I'm like, as I'm typing it out, as I'm going, and I'm just moving along, not really paying attention to the corkboard anymore. And then I go back and look, I realize, oh, I'm like not even following that anymore. I just went, so yes, I'm a pantser, because plotting things out don't work for me. Because my brain be like, no, that doesn't work anymore. What I said was going to happen, that's not going to be the way I want it to go now, because the characters aren't bringing it there. The story is not going there. So, yeah.
Morning writer.
Okay. Good question. More like vacation writer.
Day off.
Day off. Well, no, not day off. I need the time to sit and not have distractions of, okay.
Husband, dogs, and cats.
Well, it's not too bad. I like it best. Like I started off, I took our youngest's room after he was moved out, and I took this folding table, put it in front of the window so I could see outside. For me, being able to see outside, that's like relaxing. I can just look at nothing, or the trees, the birds, whatever, and just think. And I just wrote. That's where I started doing all my writing. And then I found myself kind of gravitating to the swing outside or to other places. And so this was nice about having a laptop. You can go anywhere. On our trips down to Jay, to the new house, when we were moving trailers full of stuff, I'd bring my laptop and I would write there on the way down, because it's like a 5.5 hour trip. But yeah, it's mostly, I can't have anything else that's going to distract me. If I'm going to, I know some people, it's a religious thing. Like I do this first thing in the morning, or I do this every day at a certain time. I would like to be that disciplined. But again, if you didn't catch my profession, I'm a teacher, and those things will take precedent over writing my book. Unfortunately, when you've got to write plans out and stuff and correct and put your grades in, that's what I'm going to do first. But that doesn't mean I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do next. So, but come summer vacation, usually after I get the little miscellaneous things done in the morning and I've had a breakfast, I'll go outside. If it's nice, I'll sit on the porch with my laptop. My dog will just lay down in the sun next to me on the porch, just enjoying it, and I'll just type. And I'll just go, until I got to get up and put the laundry in the dryer or something like that. Or pee or whatever. Or Sadie's got to go and get something to drink or whatever, Till something else pops up and I take a little break and I'll come back and I'll write. And I've seen times where I can spend maybe an hour, and then that's as much as I can do. And then there are times where I will designate almost an entire day and I'll be like, oh, I did nothing. Oh, wait a minute, I typed this, But I still feel like I didn't accomplish anything if I didn't do something other than just that. So I got to find that balance. Yeah. But thank you.
Where do people find your books?
Amazon. Amazon.com. You just type in Theresa B. Sear. I've got a QR code. If people scan that, they can get right to my books. But I also have books here. If anybody can't find it on Amazon and they want books from me, I've got plenty. I can easily ship a book. Yeah. I take multiple methods of payment. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Well, Miss Theresa Sear, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody coming. Thank you.